Now, I had one woman who was a kindergarten teacher. Her name was Freddie Berthes. How many people remember what your kindergarten teacher looked like? Raise your hand. All right, how many people had a kindergarten teacher who was overweight? Raise your hand. How many people had a kindergarten teacher that had a beautiful smile? Raise your hand. All right, that's what Freddie Berthes looked like. She was a heavy-set woman, had a beautiful smile. She had a child who was graduating from high school. She had 2 children who were young. They were about 7 and 9 at this time. And she was married to a preacher in Salisbury, this very town. And his name was Ernest Berthes, Reverend Ernest Berthes. Well, they had separated after 40 years of marriage, long, long, long time. And Reverend Berthes did some things that made Ms. Berthes uncomfortable, so she went to the magistrate's office and got a warrant for communicating threats, meaning that he had said to her, I'm going to hurt you or I'm going to get you or something like that. So she went to the magistrate's office and then ended up, the case was prosecuted in district court. And Reverend Berthes came in and he was able to say, look, I've never done anything wrong in my whole life. Don't do anything bad to me, Judge. And so the judge did something called a PJC. Anybody ever heard that in speeding cases? A prayer for judgment continued. And what that means is that's not a criminal prosecution. It's saying, look, you've been good your whole life. If you continue to be good, we won't do anything about that case. And so that's how that case ended. So then about maybe 3 weeks after that, Mrs. Berthes and the 2 little kids came up to me in Salisbury in the district court office, and she said, look, he's calling my school and I'm worried that I'm going to lose my job. Will you bring him back into court? And I said, I'll be glad to. Are you afraid of him? And she said, no, I just don't want to lose my job as a school teacher. It's important to me. So I did the paperwork so that he'd be brought back into court, got set in front of one judge. That judge said, look, I'm not the judge who sentenced him. I'm going to put it back on this other judge who was the original judge who sentenced him. And in the meantime, it was in June. It was graduation time. And Mrs. Berthes' daughter, the oldest one, was getting ready to graduate. So what they did was they were going to a party, went to a house to pick up a cake, and the daughter goes inside to pick up the cake. Mrs. Berthes is in the front seat passenger, and the 2 little kids are in the back. Well, Reverend Berthes had followed them in another car. Her window was rolled down. And he came up to that window with a butcher knife about 7 inches long, and he stabbed her 17 times until she died in front of her 2 small children. The officers who investigated the case said that there was gallons of blood in the front passenger seat. They called me to tell me that Mrs. Berthes had been killed. They also told me that about 30 minutes after that, Reverend Berthes walked into the jail in Rowan County, his hands still dripping in blood, holding a Bible saying, I have sinned. I was devastated. I thought, did the system fail her? What's the problem with this? What went wrong? Did I do something wrong? I mean, remember, I'm only 7 or 8 years older than you are. The police officers went and searched Mrs. Berthes' house. And what they found was a diary that she'd been keeping every year since they'd been married. And it talked about how she was an abused spouse. Every single year of that marriage, mental abuse and physical abuse. And one line she wrote in it haunts me to this day. She said, I am guilty of being an abused spouse. She never told anyone because of who she was in the community. She didn't want that to hurt her family. And as a result, eventually, Reverend Berthes went off to prison for the rest of his life. Mrs. Berthes was gone, and those 2 children were orphans. That's the kind of cases that I got to work on in the DA's office. The point of me telling you this story is this. Every single one of you knows a relationship, or some of you may be in one, where somebody's being physically or mentally abusive to the other person. You have got to tell someone. You have got to tell someone and not end up the Freddie Berthes. Now, how many people here currently believe in the death penalty? Raise your hand. All right, how many people do not believe in the death penalty? Raise your hand. How many people are not sure yet? Raise your hand. My bet is that over your lifetime, you're going to change your opinion in one way or the other. I want to talk to you just for a few minutes because very soon, if not now, you guys are going to be the taxpayers in this world. And you need to care desperately about how your tax money is being spent. Now, here's one example. This is from a case study that was done at Duke a number of years ago, and it says, it is assumed that there is only one execution for every 10 people who are sentenced to death sentence defendants. Then the extra cost per execution of prosecuting a case capitally is more than $2.16 million. You know, a lot of people think, oh, well, we'll just put them to death, that'll be cheaper. In fact, it ends up being more than that. Now, a lot of you may also know that DNA has come into being, frankly, since not terribly long before you were born, and that a number of people have been exonerated, released, who were serving prison terms. Now, this article I pulled in 2002. There were 100 people who had been exonerated because of the death penalty. 100 people had been convicted of murder who were innocent. Not just they couldn't prove it, innocent, weren't there, who were serving time. Some of them were sitting waiting to be executed. Now that number is over 200. Now, what is the cost of incarceration? Look at these statistics. You've got 2.3 million people in jail in the United States. Isn't that amazing? $2.3 million in jail. 2.3 million people in jail. States last year spent $68 billion with a B on people in jail, and that there are 40,000 people in North Carolina in prison or jail right this minute. That's more than the population of this city. Now guess what? And you may have heard this statistic already. You know about how much it costs to keep somebody in jail for a year? Somewhere around $40,000 a year. You could almost send them to Harvard for what taxpayers pay to keep people in jail. But what's a judge supposed to do? The guy goes and steals a loaf of bread. He gets probation the first time. He steals another loaf of bread. Well, that time they give him supervised probation. Well, what does the judge do at the end of the third time he steals a loaf of bread? Apparently he's not going to change his behavior. That's the way judges have to balance. They say, is it worth keeping somebody spending taxpayer money that much because of these kind of things? And what if you're wrong? What if, in fact, the person is innocent?